There is no one rule in the core book of 10th edition of Warhammer 40,000 that's called Fight on Death. But through detachment rules, unit abilities, or stratagems, you might gain the power to fight after death. This refers generally to models in melee that have not fought so far this phase, getting or potentially getting the chance to make their close combat attacks before they're removed from play. If you had the ability to shoot in the shooting phase when killed, like with a death befitting an officer, we would call that shoot on death. Not to be confused with what the community calls shoot back. Stratagems like Praise the Fallen, where the survivors shoot back at the enemy. But this video isn't about that. It's about fight on death, what it is, when it happens, and how it occurs. For the most part, my advice is read the unit ability and read the rules commentary. That tells you how it works. Because each fight on death may be a bit different, so I can't cover all of the particular nuances, but I am going to give a general explanation so you can listen to me and receive a good understanding of this rule. This rule that doesn't have a specific rule in the core rules. Thank you for listening to me today. Let's make the death of your warriors mean pain for the enemy. We will look at how it works and then when to use it best. In general, there are two kinds of fight on death. Fight on death and fight on death on a 4+. So that's fight on death sometimes. Though modifiers may make it a different role, like the Pact-Bound Zealots Chaos Space Marines have fight on death on a 4+, but it is fight on death on a 3+ if the unit to use it has the Khorne keyword. The Adeptus Sororitas modifier has the ability on its unit datasheet to fight on death on a 2+. When you do this conditional fight on death, you roll for each individual model to see if it fights. This matters for positioning, which models will actually be the ones that can potentially fight. It might not be the ones closest to the enemy. And also which weapons they have. With 6 dead, you don't just roll 6 dice at once and then pick your best models out of, say, the 3 successors, choosing the character and the models with the big axes. This is per model, so you roll separately for each model and then remove them as destroyed now, or if you pass the roll, they are not removed from play and will pile in and fight with all models that roll their successors. These models fight at the same time, and the next part works the same way if you have guaranteed fight on death or conditional fight on death, but only with those models that succeeded at the conditional roll. This is the sequence. When you use the stratagem, if it's a stratagem, we'll say on the stratagem. For example, in the fight phase. If it just says, in the fight phase, use it sometime before your unit is selected as the target of a melee attack, or when they are selected as the target of a melee attack. That's when you use Spirit of the Martyr. This stratagem may last until the enemy has finished their attacks, or it may last for the entire phase. Each stratagem has its own wording. But they're all about the fight phase. Taking casualties in the fight phase or from a melee attack, or the stratagem can only be used in the fight phase, so you won't be fighting on death from pistol attacks in the shooting phase, even if you were in engagement range. Then the way it happens is laid out in the rules commentary. After the enemy unit has finished making all of their attacks, but before that enemy unit consolidates after making their attacks, the models in your unit that are fighting on death get to pile in, and they roll their attacks with the models, just the models that are fighting on death. So if you had a unit of 10, and 6 of them died, and 3 of them are fighting on death because it was fight on death on a 4+, those 3 models will pile in and make their attacks, but only those 3 models. The dying models do not consolidate after they made their attacks, and usually this is where the sequence ends, and that's all you need to know. After this, any other rules from the unit's death happens. This is the time that Deadly Demise happens. So that modifier that fights on death on a 2+, you roll the dice, you didn't roll a 1, it gets to pile in, it makes its attacks, and once it's finished making the attacks, now you'll roll to see if it explodes. But if there was another enemy unit in combat with the fight on death unit that hadn't fought yet this phase and also had fight on death, now they trigger their fight on death. So if Unit A for the red player was fighting on death after getting attacked by Blue Unit B, and the models from Unit A killed some of Blue's Unit C, now those models from Unit C get to fight on death. And if they killed any more of Unit A, then those newly dead models fight on death, and back and forth it goes until nobody dies or everyone is dead. Then, that Unit B that initially attacked, it was that unit that was selected to fight in the first place, They've made their attacks, the fight on death has happened, now they get to consolidate. That is the end of that unit's activation, and the fight phase continues as normal, usually with another unit being selected to fight. So that's the whole sequence. There are many important parts regarding which abilities and such that you can use. There is an FAQ in the rules commentary about destroyed units and effects. Units can still benefit from abilities and give out auras even when they're fighting on death. So a Repentia Superior can still give her unit full rerolls to hit and full rerolls to wound. That's guaranteed if they were in the Hallowed Martyrs using the Spirit of the Martyr stratagem. If they were in the Penitent Host, under the Death Before Disgrace vow from the detachment rule, and they fight on death under 2+, if you rolled for the Superior and failed the roll, she would be removed from play now before any of the models fight. I'm assuming this is the way because there is a specification that models that succeeded at the roll are explicitly not removed from play yet. Characters dying while leading a unit has different interpretations from the rules commentary. So a character like a Palatine gives lethal hits while leading a unit. If she died, and the unit is fighting on death, those abilities usually, or arguably, should end when the enemy unit's attacks are resolved. The general view people take is the character is still there. We're fighting on death in the rules commentary, and fight on death happens before any other rules are triggered. The example is Deadly Demise, but it could also be ending the attached unit rule. And the FAQ in the rules commentary says, when the model is destroyed, until it is removed from the battlefield, it continues to benefit from all its abilities until removed from the table. So our Palatine in the Hallowed Martyrs, who is fighting on death, who hasn't been removed from the table, will continue to give her unit lethal hits, and the models, including herself, who are fighting on death, will have lethal hits. The contrasting part is the while leading a unit part of that same rules commentary, which says you stop being an attached unit after the enemy unit's attacks are resolved. So there's debate. Has the enemy unit now finished making their attacks and that is when we trigger the stop leading a unit time? Or do we say stopping leading a unit happens at the same time as things like Deadly Demise, which is what the rest of the rules commentary seems to be implying. Like, fight on death is a pause before the normal continuation of events. I think it should be fine to let the character continue to give their abilities for the rest of the fight on death activation. Because it would suck if the Abominant that is giving their unit fight on death, that wouldn't work if the Abominant was killed as part of the attack. When creating these rules, they would have had to think, okay, 3 Aberrants died, okay, those 3 Aberrants get to roll to see if they fight on death. But if all 5 Aberrants and the Abominant was killed at once, then no one is fighting on death. That seems not correct. So you keep the character's abilities, like lethal hits, like fight on death, until your fight on death models have finished making their attacks. Slight side note to all this, take a breath. If the character gave the unit any persisting effects, such as anything that lasted until the end of the phase or until the end of the battle round, that continues to affect the unit even though the character has been destroyed. Another big important thing to note about units fighting on death, the unit that is fighting on death has not been selected to fight. That is a specific step in the fight phase. In the fight phase, you alternate selecting a unit to fight, and for each unit that is selected to fight, you go through the attack sequence, they pile in, they make their attacks, they consolidate. When you are fighting on death, you are not selecting your unit to fight. So the survivors of the unit can be picked to fight later in the phase. With fight on death, it's almost always the rule that if you fought this phase already, you cannot fight on death. Going back, if we had units A, B, and C, and Unit B had just finished their attacks, Unit A will fight on death with any models that died, and then, when Unit B has done its consolidation and it's finished its activation, then we go back to selecting a unit to fight with, then we could pick our Unit A. That is assuming that Unit C doesn't have fight first from, for example, charging, and it's our turn to pick a unit to activate. The second result of your unit fighting on death not being selected to fight is that you can't use any abilities from your unit or attach characters or detachment rules or stratagems that include the words when selected to fight. So the Archoflagellants have the ability to activate their trigger word to increase their attacks to 6 per model, as that states when selected to fight. so this isn't an option for any arcoflagellants fighting on death. By the same token, enemy stratagems that are used when an enemy unit is selected to fight can't be used right now. But stratagems like Righteous Vengeance in the Hallowed Martyrs that is used on a unit before it has been selected to fight, giving the unit full rerolls to hit and maybe full rerolls to wound and last until the end of the phase, that can be used now, because your unit has not been selected to fight yet this phase. When we're thinking of enemy stratagems that cannot be used when an enemy unit is selected to fight, if you just jumped at the screen and went, ooh, Armor of Contempt, that means they can't use Armor of Contempt. Not true. They can use Armor of Contempt. That is used when an enemy unit selects its targets. That is a normal part of the normal page 34 standard attack sequence of choosing weapons, choosing targets for those weapons, and rolling the dice to make attacks. You can use Armor of Contempt in response to some enemy models fighting on death. When selected to fight is a page 32 thing, and the rules commentary about fight on death says you follow the normal attack sequence from page 33 onwards. More important abilities and stat situations for fighting on death, you count as having 1 wound left. This matters for monsters and vehicles that get -1 to hit when reduced to a certain number of wounds. So in the Gladius Task Force, if you are using only on Death Does Duty End, which is a stratagem, and you used it on a Redemptor Dreadnought, that Redemptor Dreadnought counts as having 1 wound, so it is -1 to hit as per its unit data card. When reduced to this many wounds, it's -1 to the hit roll. This also means that the Blood of Martyrs special rule that gives you +1 to hit and +1 to wound will affect the Mortifier. It only has 1 wound left, and if that started as a unit of 1, it is below half strength. Another way the Blood of Martyrs will affect your units? The models that are fighting on death count as destroyed. This matters for the Blood of Martyrs when calculating if a unit is below half strength. So if there were 10 models in the squad and 6 were dead and fighting on death, they count themselves as dead, and as a unit of technically 4 alive models, the unit is below half strength, so you will get the +1 to hit and +1 to wound on the attacks rolled for the models fighting on death. Next thing, you can't fight on death twice with a model. If you're under the effect of multiple rules that give you fight on death, like in the Penitent Host, the Mortifier has its own unit rule, and the Detachment rule Vow, both of them which could let it fight on death, it will only fight on death once. But if you rolled for the Mortifier's Anguish of the Unredeemed ability, and you rolled a 1, then you could roll the Death Before Disgrace ability to see if the model does fight on death. It's not that you only get 1 roll to see if you fight on death, but you can only fight on death once. That makes it a bit clearer as to what happens step by step and what abilities are in play when you're fighting on death. So if fight on death is triggered by a stratagem, when is best to use fight on death? Use it when you expect your unit to get wiped out. If the enemy is only going to kill a couple of models, spend your command points elsewhere. Maybe spend them on Armor of Contempt instead of on Only in Death Does Duty End. Use it when one of your good combat units is charged. That's a unit that can cause a lot of damage to the enemy when it fights. If your fight on death is only activated by stratagems, don't get sucked into using it just to get to fight back in some way. It needs to be worth it. If Chaos Terminators are killing your arcoflagellants won't be able to hurt their 2+ armor with AP 0 attacks. But Repentia, with damage 2 and AP -2 and the ability to reroll hits and wounds, will cause far more damage and perhaps take out that Terminator unit at the same time. It messes up the idea that many tournament players have in their head when thinking of 40k, like chess, where you trade pieces. You put a piece out, another unit takes it, and then you take that unit in turn. Chess doesn't usually have exploding pawns that take out the enemy piece. If you have enough command points for fight on death, you could charge an enemy unit that has fight first. When it is your turn and you charge an enemy that has fight first, they will activate before your charging unit. I have a video explaining how fights first works if you want the refresher. When I've been fighting against orcs in the Warhorde, I had a Genesteal Occult Metamorph unit led by a Locust. The Locust gives the unit fight first. I was on an objective that was a tempting target, so my opponent needs to take it from me. That's going to be very difficult for a combat army to get rid of. So rather than allowing the unit to run around and keep charging in my turn and then I can pick what I kill, he charged some orc boys at the unit, knowing that I would fight first, but using the stratagem orcs is never beaten, so that any orcs I killed will fight on death. And so he was able to clear me off the objective, even though I killed him before his models could fight. This could also be used if you use heroic intervention against a charging enemy unit. Charging units get the charge bonus of fight first. Units that heroically intervene do not get that bonus. So having something that lets them fight before they drop would be nice, otherwise you spent one command point on heroic intervention to kill more of your own troops. Being able to fight on death means that they can still bring down the enemy, even if they get targeted and killed in turn. Maybe when you heroically intervened, the enemy will not be able to kill all of your models because they lack the armor penetration or they lack the number of attacks. But you charge this unit because you want to remove them, and will only be able to get rid of them with the full weight of your unit's attacks. Fight on death will give you all of your unit fighting, and if it was a rather narrow passageway that you were charging through, you could take off the models that died but still fight with them, then they get removed, and then when it comes time to activate that unit, the unit will pile in through that gap left by the models you've already taken off, and be able to fight with more models than they reasonably would have been able to in that narrow passage. Fight on death will work well as a counter to fight first, as long as it is guaranteed fight on death, and you should have some models left in this unit, or have another nearby unit to take the objective from the enemy. Like in that situation with the orcs fighting my metamorphs, and both units being wiped out, there was an orc truck there to stay on the objective and succeed in the tempting target secondary mission. That is Fight on Death. I have a playlist explaining so many other rules in 40k if you would like to check through the library and look up any other rules that you're not sure about. My darlings and viewers, have a great day of 40k.